Low wind, distant echo of footsteps. Soft, sad piano begins. They were not soldiers. They were not criminals. They were not rebels. They were just ordinary people, living ordinary lives. In a quiet English village that believed tomorrow would look like yesterday, but one winter night, everything ended in the freezing darkness of 1943. Lanterns flickered outside stone cottages. Families stood in silence. Mothers pressed their children to their chests. Fathers looked at doors they would never unlock again. They had been given an order, not a request, not a discussion, an order: you must leave. They were told it would only be for a few weeks. They were promised they would return once the war was over, so they packed what little they could. They locked their homes. They whispered goodbyes to walls that had heard generations of laughter. They walked away. None of them knew that history was about to erase them. Most wars are remembered for their battles, for their heroes, for their victories, but some wars are remembered for what they stole in silence: a village, a childhood, a future that never arrived. This is one of those stories. Before the war, Imber was hidden among rolling hills and quiet roads, a place where everyone knew everyone, where church bells marked time better than clocks, where children played in narrow streets and farmers watched the weather more than the news. It was not famous. It was not rich. It was not powerful. It was simply home. Families had lived there for centuries. Grandparents slept beneath the soil that their grandchildren played on. Life moved slowly, gently, peacefully, and that was exactly why it was chosen. War does not always announce itself with explosions. Sometimes it arrives with paperwork. Officials came with documents, maps were unfolded, lines were drawn, and just like that, a decision was made in an office, miles away, that would destroy an entire community. They said the land was needed for military training. They said it was essential for victory. They said sacrifice was necessary. What they did not say was that the sacrifice would never be returned. For weeks, families lived in disbelief. They waited for the decision to change. They waited for someone to stop it. They waited for a miracle, but the soldiers came anyway. Boots on frozen ground, commands in calm voices, trucks waiting at the edge of the village. No shouting, no chaos, just quiet devastation. On the final night, windows glowed softly one last time. Children slept in beds they would never return to. Some people walked through their homes again, touching walls, touching furniture, as if trying to memorize the feeling, because deep down, they sensed the truth. People always do, and when the last family left, something else arrived, not immediately, not loudly, but slowly. Relentlessly. War entered the empty streets. Tanks followed the same paths children once ran through. Explosions echoed where laughter once lived. Churches, homes, gardens all became targets. The sounds of ordinary life were replaced with gunfire and collapsing stone. A village that had survived centuries of storms, plagues, and hardship could not survive one decision. But the most terrifying part of this story is not the destruction of buildings. It is the destruction of promises, because the people never stopped waiting. They waited through the end of World War II. They waited through decades of peace. They waited through entire lifetimes. Some died still believing they would one day go home. Others lived long enough to realize they had been lied to. Today, the village still stands, not fully alive, not fully dead, frozen between past and present. A place where time stopped, but memory did not. It is now locked behind military gates, marked as forbidden, hidden from the world, but not from history. And behind those gates, the echoes of ordinary lives still remain. This is not a ghost story. This is not a legend. This is not fiction. This is the true story of a village taken by war. And never given back, music slowly rises, then fades into a deep silence. And this is where the story truly begins. Cold wind, soft crying, distant military boots. The winter of 1943 was cruel, not just because of the cold, but because this was the night an entire village lost its future. Lanterns flickered weakly against the fog. A terrified British family stood outside their stone cottage, their breath visible in the freezing air. Tears ran down their faces as soldiers watched in silence. They were not criminals. They were farmers, mothers, children, grandparents, Yet they were being forced to leave everything behind. A mother clutched her child tightly, as if her arms could somehow protect the house from being taken. A father locked the door with shaking hands. He paused, as if hoping the door would unlock itself again, but it never would. The soldiers did not shout. They did not threaten. They did not need to. The order had already been signed. They were told it was temporary. They were promised they would come back after the war. And so, with hearts breaking in silence, they stepped away from their homes. None of them knew they were walking away from their entire lives. Village turned into a battlefield. Tank engines, explosions tearing through the night the moment the last footsteps faded from the village road. The war moved in. Tanks crushed the cobblestone streets beneath their iron tracks. Burning rooftops lit the sky orange. Shells slammed through stone walls that once heard laughter. This was no longer a village, it was a target. Windows exploded inward like falling stars. Bedrooms turned into firing positions. Gardens turned into craters. The echoes of explosions replaced the sound of children playing. No one lived here anymore. Yet the village was dying again and again. Every single day, the soldiers called it training. But training for war was built on the destruction of innocent homes. Graves left behind a distant helicopter, whispering wind through broken trees. Even the dead were not spared. Under pale moonlight, the old church graveyard lay silent. Broken headstones leaned at strange angles, shattered by shockwaves of nearby explosions. Generations were buried here. Fathers who built the village, mothers who raised families, children who never grew old. They never fled. They were never warned. They were left behind. Forever above them, war helicopters thundered through the sky. The roar of war passed directly over the resting dead. Some soldiers later whispered about strange sounds in this graveyard, footsteps where no one walked. Voices carried on the wind, whether real or imagined. One truth remained: even death found no peace here. Homes frozen in time, soft ticking, then silence inside the abandoned houses. Time did not move forward, it stopped. A broken clock on the wall showed the same hour it did in 1943. Dust covered the furniture like a burial shroud. A family photograph still hung crooked on the wall. Faces smiled in that photograph. They did not know what was coming. Sunlight slipped through shattered glass and touched the floor, a floor that had not felt footsteps in decades. A chair still waited at the table. A cup still sat where someone left it. The war left the homes behind, but the homes never left the families. They remained, waiting for owners who would never return. Tank firing at the ancient church. Massive explosion. Rolling thunder of collapsing stone. The ancient church stood at the heart of the village. It had seen weddings, baptisms, funerals, generations of prayer. On this day, it became a target. A military tank aligned its barrel with holy stone. The trigger was pulled. The shell tore through the church in a single violent breath. Fire burst through the stained glass. The bell tower cracked and collapsed. Centuries of faith crumbled into dust. No prayers were spoken, no forgiveness was asked. The house of God had become nothing more than practice. Ghosts of the evicted cold wind. Faint whispers layered in the darkness when night falls. The village is no longer empty. Mist rolls through the streets. Moonlight casts strange shapes on broken walls. Some claim to see figures standing where houses once glowed with life. Transparent faces. Watching doors seem to creak open on their own. Footsteps echo where no one should be. The soldiers dismissed it as imagination, but fear has a way of knowing when something is wrong. Are these only ghost stories? Or are the spirits of the evicted still searching for the lives that were stolen from them? No one truly knows, but no one ever stays here after dark. Children watching their home die. Rainfall. Trembling breath. Distant shouting to small children stand in the rain, holding hands. Their fingers are cold. Their clothes are soaked. Their eyes are wide with fear. They watch as soldiers march into their village. Behind them is their school. Ahead of them is their home. A tank rolls past the place where they once played. They do not understand politics. They do not understand war strategy. They only understand loss. No child should ever witness the moment their world is taken apart. But this one did, and that memory never left them.